In the beautiful land of Africa, the kingdom of Niavera was a land of peace and prosperity, ruled by King Nshoma, a wise and just leader. He was loved by his people because he treated everyone fairly, from the wealthiest noble to the poorest farmer. His heart belonged to his first wife, Queen Endeleza, a kind and gentle woman who stood by his side and brought joy to the kingdom. Their happiness seemed endless until tragedy struck. Endeleza died while giving birth to their daughter, Zebiba. The king was devastated, but despite his grief, he found comfort in his newborn daughter. She became the light of his life, and he made sure she was raised with love and wisdom. As the years passed, Zebiba grew into a graceful and intelligent young girl. The people of Niavera adored her, and many believed that one day she would make a great ruler, just like her father. However, the king's advisors worried that Niavera needed a queen once more. They urged him to remarry, saying the kingdom needed a mother figure, and Zebiba needed guidance as she grew older. After much persuasion, King Nshoma agreed and eventually chose a woman named Mafundo. She was beautiful, charming, and spoke sweetly, winning over the court and the king. But beneath her warm smile, Mafundo was nothing like Endeleza. She was ambitious, manipulative, and filled with jealousy the moment she set eyes on Zebiba. At first, Mafundo pretended to care for Zebiba, acting like a loving stepmother, but deep inside, she hated the young girl. She saw how much the king adored his daughter, and it made her furious. She wanted all the power and attention for herself. When Mafundo gave birth to her own son, Omulaba, her hatred for Zebiba only grew stronger. She became obsessed with the idea that Omulaba should be the next ruler, not Zebiba. Slowly, Mafundo began whispering into the king's ears, poisoning his mind. She told him that a kingdom needed a strong male ruler, not a girl. She made him doubt whether Zebiba could ever truly lead. Though the king still loved his daughter, Mafundo's words started to take root in his heart. But Mafundo didn't stop there. She knew that as long as Zebiba was in the palace, the people would still love her. So, she decided to get rid of her forever. She plotted in secret, planning the downfall of the innocent princess. And when the time was right, she put her wicked plan into motion, a plan that would change Zebiba's life forever. Zebiba blossomed into a graceful and intelligent young woman, admired by all who knew her. She carried herself with kindness and dignity, just like her mother, Queen Endeleza. The people of Niavera adored her, not just because she was the daughter of their beloved king, but because she treated everyone with respect, whether rich or poor. She often walked through the marketplace, speaking to the traders, asking about their families, and offering help where she could. The elders would smile and say she had her mother's heart, and the young girls dreamed of being like her one day. But there was one person who did not share the people's love for Zebiba, Queen Mafundo. Every time she saw the way the people admired Zebiba, she burned with jealousy. She had spent years whispering into the king's ears, convincing him that only a son could rule. Yet despite her efforts, she sensed that deep down, King Nshoma still believed in his daughter. What if, when the time came, he declared Zebiba as his successor instead of Omulaba? The very thought made Mafundo furious. She had worked too hard to secure power for her son. She could not allow Zebiba to remain a threat. Mafundo knew that simply asking the king to remove Zebiba would not be enough. Nshoma was still a father, and despite her poisonous words, a part of him still loved his daughter. If she wanted Zebiba gone, she needed to turn the entire kingdom against her. She needed a plan so wicked, so undeniable, that even the king would have no choice but to cast his daughter away. She turned to the one person who could help her, the corrupt and power-hungry Chief Bahati. He was a man who always wanted more land, more riches, more influence. He had never truly been loyal to King Nshoma, but he had never dared to challenge him outright. Mafundo, however, knew exactly how to tempt him. She promised him greater control over the kingdom, a place at Omulaba's side once he became king. If Bahati helped her remove Zebiba, she would make sure his wealth and power tripled. Bahati agreed without hesitation. Together, they created a lie so terrible, so dangerous, that it would spread like wildfire. They accused Zebiba of treason. The whispers started in the dark corners of the palace. Servants overheard secret conversations that never truly happened. Guards claimed they had seen Zebiba meeting with strange visitors at night. Soon, the rumor took on a life of its own. Zebiba was plotting to overthrow her own father. The people were in shock. How could the princess they loved betray the king? Some refused to believe it, but the rumors kept growing. Chief Bahati made sure that false witnesses came forward, swearing they had seen Zebiba writing secret messages and meeting with enemies of the kingdom. When the rumors finally reached the king, he refused to believe them at first. "My daughter would never do such a thing," he said. But Mafundo played her role well. She wept, pretending to be a heartbroken mother, telling him she had always tried to love Zebiba like her own child. "I ignored the signs, my king," she whispered through her fake tears. "But now, I fear for your life. If Zebiba truly loves you, why would so many say these things about her?" Doubt seeped into King Nashoma's heart. He wanted to believe his daughter, but the evidence was overwhelming. Could it be true? Could Zebiba, his own flesh and blood, really be planning to betray him? He felt as if a knife had been plunged into his heart. His once clear judgment was clouded by grief, confusion, and the relentless voices around him. At last, he made the most painful decision of his life. He could not allow treason in his kingdom, even if the accused was his own daughter. With a heavy heart, he declared before the court and the people of Nyavera, "Zebiba is hereby exiled from Nyavera." Gasps filled the throne room. Zebiba, who had remained silent through all the accusations, felt her heart shatter. She looked at her father, pleading with her eyes, hoping he would see the truth. But his gaze was distant, broken. The father who had once held her hand and told her stories of her mother now looked at her as if she were a stranger. The guards stepped forward, grabbing her arms. The people watched in stunned silence as their beloved princess was dragged away, banished from the only home she had ever known. And in the shadows of the throne room, Mafundo and Bahati exchanged a secret, victorious smile. Their plan had worked. Zebiba was gone, but they had no idea that this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The journey to the forest of Engano was long and silent. The soldiers, hardened warriors who had fought in many battles, avoided looking into Zebiba's eyes. Deep down, they knew this was wrong. They had seen her grow up, had witnessed her kindness. Yet, they feared Queen Mafundo's wrath more than they feared their own guilt. Zebiba sat in the cart, her hands tied in thick ropes, her body swaying with every bump in the road. The once proud princess, beloved by the people, was now nothing more than a prisoner. She had begged her father to listen, but his face had remained cold. The memory of his final words of exile echoed in her mind, each syllable cutting deeper than any blade. When they arrived at the edge of the cursed forest, the soldiers hesitated. Even the bravest among them feared Engano. It was said that those who entered never returned. The air was thick and heavy, filled with an eerie silence, as if the trees themselves were watching. Legends spoke of spirits who guarded the land, punishing anyone who dared disturb them. "Tie her to the tree," the captain ordered, his voice rough, but underneath there was unease. They dragged Zebiba to the heart of the forest, where a massive baobab tree stood like a silent guardian, its twisted branches stretched toward the sky, its roots sinking deep into the cursed ground. The soldiers bound her hands tightly against the trunk, the rough bark cutting into her skin. "Please," Zebiba whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do this." The captain clenched his jaw. "Forgive us, princess." But they had their orders, and disobeying Queen Mafundo meant death. As soon as the last knot was secured, the soldiers turned away, moving quickly back toward their horses. One of the younger men looked back, his eyes filled with regret, but the captain grabbed his arm, shaking his head. No one disobeyed the queen. Then, without another word, they left her there, alone. Zebiba screamed, her voice echoing through the dark forest, but the sound of galloping horses soon faded into silence. She pulled at the ropes, her wrists burning as she struggled. She could not die here. She would not die here. Night fell, bringing with it an unnatural stillness. The wind whispered through the trees, but it carried voices, soft, eerie, in a language she did not understand. Shadows shifted between the trunks, moving unnaturally, as if the forest itself was alive. The howls of wild beasts echoed in the distance, drawing closer. Zebiba's body trembled. Was this the end? Her throat was dry from crying. Her arms ached. Her legs had gone numb. And then she heard it, a rustling, a presence. Something, or someone, was watching. Her heart pounded as a shadow emerged from the trees. Not a beast, not a spirit, but a man. His long silver hair flowed over his shoulders, his face weathered with time. He carried a wooden staff, his robes tattered but dignified. his eyes, sharp and knowing, locked onto hers. Mzee Walemu. He stepped forward, studying her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he pulled a curved knife from his belt and sliced through the ropes that bound her. Zebiba collapsed to the ground, her body weak, her spirit broken. But as the old man knelt beside her, she realized something. She was still alive, and as long as she lived, her story was not over. Zebiba could barely stand. Her legs trembled, and her wrists throbbed where the ropes had cut into her skin. But she was free. The old man, Mzee Walemu, had saved her. His face was calm, his eyes sharp as he studied her. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. Zebiba nodded weakly, though every part of her ached. She did not know who this man was, but she knew one thing: staying here meant death. She forced herself up, swaying as dizziness hit her, but Mzee Walemu caught her arm. "We must go," he said. "The forest watches those who enter. You are not safe here." Without another word, he led her deeper into the forest. Zebiba stumbled behind him, her body heavy with exhaustion. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around them. She could hear whispers again, but this time they did not frighten her. It was as if the forest itself was guiding them. After what felt like hours, they reached a hidden wooden gate, woven into the trees so well that no outsider would ever notice it. Mzee Walemu tapped his staff on the ground 3 times, and the gate slowly opened. Zebiba gasped. Beyond the gate was an entire village, houses built into the trees, lanterns glowing softly, people moving like shadows. She had never seen anything like it. The Omuyaga clan. The villagers stopped and stared as Mzee Walemu led her in. They whispered among themselves, their eyes filled with curiosity. Who was this outsider? At the heart of the village, a large fire burned, and before it sat a circle of elders, figures draped in robes, their faces wise and knowing. At the center was Elder Nyamira, a warrior with fierce eyes and deep scars across her arms. Beside her sat Mama Bakisa, a woman with warm, watchful eyes, her hands resting on a basket of healing herbs. She was left to die, Mzee Walemu told them, his voice firm. But the forest did not take her. The elders studied Zebiba in silence. Then, Elder Nyamira spoke. "This girl carries a heavy fate." She stepped forward, looking directly into Zebiba's eyes. "Tell me, child, do you wish to live?" Zebiba's throat tightened. She thought of everything she had lost. Her father, her home, the life stolen from her. And then, she thought of Mafundo, the woman who had taken it all. "I do," she whispered. "I want to live." Elder Nyamira nodded. "Then you must fight for it." From that day, Zebiba's training began. Under Elder Nyamira's guidance, she learned to fight. At first she was weak, her body unaccustomed to the weight of a sword, but Nyamira was relentless. "Again!" she would command every time Zebiba fell. "A warrior does not weep. A warrior rises." Zebiba pushed herself harder than she ever had before. She learned to strike with precision, to move with speed, to sense an enemy before they attacked. Day after day, she grew stronger, but strength was not enough. Under Mama Bakisa, Zebiba learned the power of healing. She memorized the herbs of the forest, the plants that could cure wounds and the ones that could kill. She learned how to listen to the spirit of the land, how to feel its energy. A true leader does not just destroy, Mama Bakisa told her. She heals, she protects, she understands. Weeks turned to months. Zebiba transformed. The weak girl who had been tied to a tree and left for dead was gone. In her place stood someone strong, skilled, and wise. But she was not finished yet. Her journey was just beginning. The years passed like whispers in the wind, but they did not pass in vain. Zebiba was no longer the fragile girl who had been tied to a tree and left for dead. The Omuyaga clan had given her a new life, a new purpose. She had been broken, but piece by piece, she had rebuilt herself into something stronger, something unstoppable. Her body, once frail from hunger and despair, was now honed like a blade. Every muscle had been tested through years of grueling training. She could strike with the speed of a serpent, move like a shadow in the night. Her enemies never saw her coming until it was too late. Her mind had sharpened too. She had studied the art of war, learned the strategies of great warriors before her. The people of the Omuyaga no longer saw her as an outsider. She was one of them now. They gave her a name, one that struck fear into those who heard it. Nyoka Yamoto, the serpent of fire. She was fast, deadly, and fearless. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a traveler arrived from Nyavera. An old man, weak and weary, collapsed at the gates of the hidden village. Zebiba was there when they carried him to Mama Bakisa's healing hut. As she looked into his tired eyes, she knew he had come from home. His voice was weak, but his words struck her like lightning. Nyavera is dying. Zebiba's breath caught in her throat. He told her everything. Queen Mafundo's rule had become cruel beyond measure. The people suffered under heavy taxes, their lands stripped bare. Starvation spread through the kingdom like a plague. King Nshoma, once strong and just, was now a shadow of himself, sick and bedridden. Omulaba, the Prince Mafundo had fought so hard to make heir, had grown into a tyrant like his mother. He ruled with an iron fist, crushing anyone who dared to speak against him. The people whispered of the lost princess, the one who had been falsely accused and exiled. Some still believed she was alive. Zebiba felt fire burning inside her. This was her home, her people, her father, and she had been forced to abandon them. No more. She rose to her feet, her heart pounding. The time had come. She walked through the village, her steps steady, her decision made. As she passed, warriors and healers alike turned to her, sensing the shift in the air. She was leaving. That night, she stood before the Omuyaga elders one last time. "I must return," she said, her voice unwavering. "I must reclaim what was stolen. My people need me." Elder Nyamira studied her carefully before nodding. "You are ready." Mama Bakisa pressed a bundle of herbs into Zebiba's hands. "For strength, for protection, for healing," she whispered. Mzee Walimu, the man who had saved her all those years ago, simply smiled. "Go, Nyoka Yamoto. Let the fire inside you burn bright." And so, Zebiba prepared for war. She was not the same girl who had been cast aside. She was no longer the forgotten princess. She was the storm that was coming to reclaim Nyavera. The road back to Nyavera was long, but Zebiba did not walk it alone. She moved like a shadow through the land, no longer a helpless girl, but a warrior draped in mystery. Dressed in dark robes, her face hidden beneath a hood, she was no longer Princess Zebiba. She was Nyoka Yamoto, the Serpent of Fire, and she was not coming back quietly. Beside her, the warriors of the Omuyaga clan marched with silent purpose. These were not ordinary fighters. They had been trained in the art of war, their movements swift, their blades sharp. They carried the secrets of the forest, the wisdom of the healers, and the unyielding loyalty of those who had sworn to fight for justice. As they traveled through the lands beyond Nyavera, they saw the suffering Mafundo had left in her wake. Villages once full of life were now starving, their people beaten down by the weight of impossible taxes. Crops had been seized, homes burned, and families left with nothing. In one village, a mother begged for mercy as a tax collector dragged her son away, payment for debts she could not afford. Zebiba watched from the shadows, her fists clenching. She stepped forward, and before the guards could react, she struck like lightning. Her blade flashed, her movements precise. In moments, the tax collectors were on the ground, groaning in pain. The villagers watched in stunned silence as she threw their stolen goods back to them. "No more," she said, her voice firm. "You owe these tyrants nothing." That was just the beginning. From village to village, Zebiba and her warriors struck. They moved in the night, taking down corrupt officials, freeing prisoners, and returning stolen food to the people. The once silent lands of Nyavera began to wake up. Whispers spread like wildfire. The Serpent of Fire is coming. A warrior is leading a rebellion. She moves like a shadow, strikes like a storm. She fights for the people. And then, the most dangerous whisper of all, it is her, the lost princess. She has returned. Hope flickered in the hearts of the people, a flame that could no longer be extinguished. Even in the capital, within the cold stone walls of the palace, Mafundo felt the shift in the air. Reports flooded in of tax collectors disappearing, of rebels rallying the villagers. She clenched her fists as fear crawled up her spine. She had tried to kill that girl once. Had she failed? Meanwhile, King Nshoma lay weak in his chambers, his body failing but his mind still sharp. And when he heard the whispers, the name of the warrior shaking his kingdom, his heart trembled with something he had not felt in years. Hope. Zebiba and her warriors did not slow. Their march to the capital had begun, and with every step, their numbers grew. Farmers, merchants, ex-soldiers, and healers. They all rose to join the cause. Nyavera was no longer silent. The storm had arrived. The palace of Nyavera stood tall, its golden walls gleaming under the sun. But within, darkness ruled. Mafundo sat upon the throne, draped in silk and jewels, believing herself untouchable. The whispers of rebellion had reached her ears, but she dismissed them with a flick of her wrist. "Zebiba is dead," she sneered. "The past cannot return." But she was wrong. As the palace doors swung open, a hush fell over the court. Guards stiffened, nobles gasped, and there, standing in the doorway, was a warrior cloaked in black and gold, her presence commanding, her eyes burning with purpose. It was her. Zebiba stepped forward, removing her hood. Her braided hair cascaded over her shoulders, her face no longer that of a frightened girl, but of a warrior reborn. Gasps filled the room as she reached into her tunic and pulled out a small gleaming pendant, the royal seal of Nyavera, the very same pendant her father had given her as a child. "I am Zebiba, daughter of King Nshoma," she declared, her voice steady, ringing through the grand hall. "The rightful heir of this throne." Mafundo's face twisted with rage. "Impossible!" she shrieked. "You were left to die." But the truth was undeniable. The court murmured, some already lowering their heads in respect. And then, Omulaba stepped forward, fury blazing in his eyes. He was taller than Zebiba, his frame built from years of privilege, not hardship. He drew his sword, smirking. "You think you can just walk in here and take my place?" He snarled. "Prove it." Zebiba did not hesitate. She unsheathed her own blade, its edge gleaming like fire. The court held its breath as the duel began. Omulaba struck first, lunging forward with brute force, but Zebiba was faster. She sidestepped effortlessly, her movements fluid, like a serpent weaving through flames. He swung again, wild, reckless. She ducked, pivoted, and struck. The sound of metal rang through the hall as her blade met his. He grew desperate, his attacks sloppy, but Zebiba was calm, every step precise. And then, in a blur of motion, she disarmed him. His sword clattered to the floor. The court fell into stunned silence. Omulaba, the so-called prince, had been defeated. Zebiba stood over him, her blade at his throat. "You were never meant to rule," she said coldly. Omulaba's arrogance shattered. He crawled back, humiliated. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, the nobles fell to their knees. First, the guards, then the advisors, and then the people outside the palace, watching in awe. They did not see a lost princess anymore. They saw a queen. The palace was no longer filled with whispers. It roared with the voices of the people. Zebiba had returned, stronger than ever, and justice was finally within reach. But there was one last thing she had to do. She strode through the grand halls, her footsteps firm, her heart pounding. At the end of the corridor, behind a golden door, lay the man who had once been the great King Nshoma. The moment she stepped inside, her breath caught. The once mighty ruler was now just a frail shadow of himself, lying on a silk-covered bed, his skin pale, his breathing weak. His once sharp eyes were dull, but when they landed on her, something flickered. Shock, disbelief, and then something deeper. "Zebiba." His voice was barely above a whisper. Tears welled in his eyes. She knelt beside him, gripping his frail hand. "Yes, Baba, I am here." Tears slipped down his wrinkled face. "They told me you were gone, that you had betrayed me." His voice cracked. "I was blind." Zebiba held his hand tighter. "It was not your fault. You were deceived." And then, with steady resolve, she told him everything. How Mafundo had poisoned his heart with lies, how she had framed Zebiba for treason, and how she had ruled with cruelty, bleeding the kingdom dry while he lay sick in his chambers. The truth shattered him. His body trembled, his breath ragged. He had trusted the wrong person, and because of it, his daughter had suffered, his people had suffered. With his last strength, King Nshoma reached for his crown and placed it in Zebiba's hands. "My child, my queen, rule justly," and with that, his weary eyes closed forever. A deep silence filled the room. Then, a scream shattered the air. Mafundo. She had been watching from the doorway, her face twisted in panic. She had lost, and now she did the only thing she could. She ran. She grabbed Omulaba by the arm. "We must leave," she hissed. "We will start over, find another kingdom." But the palace doors had already swung open. The people stood there, waiting. They had heard everything. They would not let the woman who had tormented them escape. Hands grabbed at her, at Omulaba. There was no more fear, only justice. The people dragged them to the palace steps, to the courtyard where Zebiba now stood. tall and unwavering. Her voice was calm but firm. "Mafundo, you left me tied to a tree, left me to die in the cursed forest. Now, you will feel what it is like to be powerless." And so, the people took Mafundo to the same ancient baobab tree where she had once abandoned Zebiba. They bound her hands, leaving her to face the fate she had wished upon another. As for Omulaba, he was stripped of his title, his riches, and his name. He was sent into the wilderness, banished from Niavira forever. He begged for mercy, but none was given. As the sun set, the kingdom of Niavira finally breathed freely, and at the heart of it stood Zebiba, no longer a forgotten princess, but a true queen. The kingdom of Niavira had been reborn. The dark clouds that had once hung over the land were now gone, replaced by the golden glow of hope. The people, who had suffered under Mafundo's cruel rule, now stood tall, their faces filled with joy. Justice had been served, and the true heir had returned. The palace, once a place of fear, was now alive with celebration. The great courtyard was filled with nobles, warriors, and common folk alike. Drums thundered, voices sang, and dancers moved with the rhythm of freedom. The scent of roasted meat and fresh spices filled the air as the kingdom prepared for the most glorious event in its history, the coronation of Queen Zebiba. Dressed in a flowing golden robe, embroidered with the sacred symbols of her ancestors, Zebiba stood before her people. Her braided hair was adorned with delicate beads, and around her neck she wore the pendant her mother had given her as a baby, the same one she had used to prove her identity when she returned. At the center of the palace steps stood the high priest of Niavira, holding the ancient golden crown, a symbol of wisdom, strength, and justice. "Kneel, Princess Zebiba," the high priest called. Zebiba took a deep breath and lowered herself to one knee. The moment had come. The high priest raised the crown high for all to see before gently placing it upon her head. The moment the crown touched her, the kingdom erupted in cheers. Drums pounded, voices rose in chants, and warriors lifted their swords in salute. "All hail Queen Zebiba, the true ruler of Niavira." Tears welled in Zebiba's eyes, but she did not let them fall. She stood, turning to face her people, strong, fearless, and ready to lead. She raised a hand, and the kingdom fell silent. "For too long, Niavira has suffered under lies and cruelty," she said, her voice firm yet warm. "But today, we rise again. Today, we heal. And today, we stand together, stronger than ever." The people cheered, their voices shaking the very earth beneath them. The kingdom had found its heart again, but Zebiba knew that she had not done this alone. She turned to the warriors and healers of the Omuyaga clan, the ones who had saved her when she had been left for dead. They had trained her, protected her, and given her the strength to return. "To the Omuyaga clan," Zebiba declared, "you are no longer hidden warriors of the forest. From this day forward, you are the royal protectors of Niavira. Our kingdom will always honor your wisdom and courage." The people roared in approval as the warriors of the Omuyaga stepped forward, their leader, Elder Nyamira, bowing deeply. Zebiba smiled, knowing that Niavira was no longer just her kingdom, it was their kingdom. As the sun set, the celebration continued, but in the heart of it all stood a young queen who had once been abandoned, once been tied to a tree, and left to die. Now the same people who had once turned their backs on her bowed in respect, recognizing her strength, her courage, and her destiny. Queen Zebiba had risen, and Niavira would never fall again. Niavira had suffered under the weight of greed and cruelty for too long, but now, with Queen Zebiba on the throne, the kingdom flourished like never before. Her first act as ruler was to bring justice to those who had suffered under Mafundo's tyranny. The corrupt officials who had helped her oppress the people were stripped of their positions, and the stolen wealth was returned to the villages. Taxes were lowered, and markets once again bustled with merchants selling food, fabrics, and precious stones. The streets, once filled with whispers of fear, now rang with laughter and music. But Zebiba knew that true leadership was more than just punishing the wicked. It was about building a future where such darkness could never return. She reformed the royal court, ensuring that only the wise and just held positions of power. No longer would nobles grow rich while the poor starved. Laws were changed so that every voice, whether noble or commoner, was heard in the king's hall. The people adored her. They called her the Queen of Justice, because she treated all equally, regardless of their birth. And then, One day, a great warrior from a distant land arrived at the palace gates. Prince Baraka, a noble and respected warrior from the kingdom of Sembora, had heard of Zebiba's courage and wisdom. He had led armies into battle, defended his own kingdom from invaders, and was known not just for his strength, but also for his honor. Zebiba had never thought of marriage before. Her journey had been one of survival, war, and reclaiming her throne. But when she met Baraka, she saw in him not just a warrior, but a man who shared her vision for peace and justice. Their marriage was not just a union of hearts, but a bond between two great kingdoms, ensuring peace for generations to come. The wedding was the grandest Nyavera had ever seen, with thousands gathering to celebrate. The skies were lit with lanterns, and for the first time in years, the kingdom danced without fear. As the years passed, the legend of the princess who was tied to a tree but returned as a queen was told in every village. Children gathered around elders at night to hear the story of the fearless young woman who had faced death but had risen to rule. And so, under Queen Zebiba's reign, Nyavera never again fell into darkness. The people swore to never allow corruption and cruelty to take hold of their land. They stood together, strong and united, always remembering the queen who had once been left for dead, but had returned stronger than ever. No matter how much darkness tries to destroy the light will always find a way to shine again. Zebiba's story teaches us that resilience is stronger than cruelty. She was abandoned, betrayed, and left to die, yet she refused to give up. Instead of letting hatred consume her, she used her pain to grow stronger. Life will always bring challenges, and there will always be people who try to bring others down, but those who refuse to break will always rise again. The story also shows that truth always prevails. For years, Mafundo and Omolaba thrived on lies, deceiving even the king himself. But in the end, no matter how carefully lies are built, the truth will always tear them down. The wicked may succeed for a time, but justice will always find them. Those who do wrong must remember that karma never forgets. Above all, Zebiba's journey reminds us never to underestimate the strength of a pure heart. She was not driven by revenge but by love, for her father, for her people, and for the kingdom that had once thrived under kindness and fairness. A heart that remains true, even in the face of suffering, is the strongest force in the world. No matter what life brings, never stop fighting for what is right. Never lose faith in the truth, and never let cruelty turn your heart to stone.